We can just start. Ah, eccoci, qui c'è Giuseppe. Ciao Michele. Ben arrivato.
Ciao, ciao a tutti.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ben trovati.
Ciao, ciao. Ah, ok. Ho bisogno di un secondo per la condivisione dello schermo. Ah.
Carlo, se non ti dispiace faccio anche io un test di condivisione dello schermo.
Io ancora non sto riuscendo, è un problema. Vai, comincia a farlo tu,
Ok.
perché io sto
Io
avendo...
provo a farlo adesso.
Sì, sì.
Ecco, vedete il mio schermo?
Sì, 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 perfettamente.
Perfetto. Quindi io stoppo adesso.
Ok. Io faccio un attimo un'altra prova.
Peter will soon switch to English, don't worry.
Sì, facciamo l'introduzione in italiano e poi facciamo lo switch in inglese.
Hi Carlo, hi Giuseppe, hi Peter, nice to meet you. It's Eugenio here.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay, nice to meet you as well.
I actually have, Carlo, I had some problem to join by the meetups page. I tried to reconnect by the other link that we shared internally.
Sì, quando ho notato anche io che la
Ah.
pagina ha un po' di problemi, però qualcuno sta arrivando, vedo qui Leonardo, quindi un po' di persone... Ciao Leonardo, ben arrivato.
Ciao, ciao a tutti.
Leonardo
Sì,
è...
in realtà se clicchi il link dalla pagina del meetup non va, se poi fai copy paste manuale nel browser funziona.
Sì, ho notato anche io questa cosa. Sì. Allora, io ho un attimo un problema di condivisione del mio schermo, quindi eventualmente farò la presentazione a braccio. Magari, Giuseppe, ti scoccia se ti mando le 4 slide che avevo preparato?
No, mandamene pure, non c'è problema, lo condivido io.
Grazie. Te le ho mandate così dovremmo riuscire a gestire la cosa rapidamente.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao Alberto, ben arrivato. Ciao Paolo. Ciao
Alberto, ciao Paolo.
Ciao a tutti.
Ok. Ben arrivati. Oggi sono molto felice di sfoggiare questa fantastica maglietta, non so se si vede, del quinto anniversario di Hyperledger con una fantastica torta di blocchi. Sono molto fiero di questa cosa.
Carlo, dal messaggio che avevi inserito sul gruppo WhatsApp, credevo che Hyperledger avesse già 50 anni, avevo interpretato male.
No, assolutamente.
Accidenti, quanto è longevo.
Assolutamente. E tra l'altro qui dietro ci sono tutte le date, non so se vedete, ma c'è anche Cactus, che è l'argomento di oggi. Quindi mi piaceva far vedere la maglietta, visto che mentre aspettavamo che gli altri si collegassero.
Conferma che anche altri stanno avendo difficoltà perché un paio di contatti miei li sto rigirando il link, quindi altra gente dovrebbe unirsi a breve.
Dobbiamo capire un po' meglio allora come...
Effettivamente credo che nel compilare il form per la preparazione del meetup sia stato inserito anche la parte di protocollo, e credo che invece la form inserisca automaticamente la parte di protocollo, cioè l'HTTP è ripetuto 2 volte, non so se ci avete fatto caso.
Ah, no, aspetta che faccio la prova subito.
Dai un'occhiata, Carlo, se sei tu a poterlo gestire, perché
Io
io
sono,
poi...
sì, devo sicuramente poterlo gestire io, però io lo vedo una sola volta.
È che dopo devi guardare sulla barra dell'indirizzo, sembra che, che sia corretto quando vai in alt, cioè quando ti posizioni sopra, però poi quando quando lo inserisce nella barra dell'URL ci sono due HTTPS in sequenza.
Ok, lo provo a...
Credo di aver interpretato questo.
Sì, sì, capito. Faccio subito una prova e vedo se riesco a modificarlo. Però mi sa di no. Ah, no, hai ragione, ho visto. Però non me lo fa modificare. Quindi dovremo... Probabilmente non posso più modificarlo perché l'orario è superato e non riesco più a modificarlo.
Siamo in running, riesci a fare invece qualche modifica magari nel contenuto descrittivo, magari ci rincolli il link
No, non posso fare nessuna modifica. Non posso
e
fare nessuna
allora
modifica.
troveranno un modo.
Troveranno, sì, dai, si accorgeranno che sono fatto il link. Perché è scritto bene, però effettivamente poi quando ci clicchi viene fuori male. No. Magari facciamo un post come per leggere Untitled Chapter in questo momento. Scusate per l'attesa per chi si è già collegato. Problemi... comunque un po' di gente si è collegata, dai. Quindi vedo già come siamo in 14. Probabilmente per chi... Giuseppe, ti è arrivata la... Ti posso chiedere di condividere così?
Sì,
Facciamo
faccio
partire.
subito.
Sì, sì. Grazie.
Figurati. Allora,
Ok, grazie. Grazie, gentilissimo. Aspettiamo giusto, siamo nel 38, a questo punto aspettiamo questi ultimi 2 minuti e poi partiamo. Grazie a tutti per esservi collegati. Nel tempo. Vedo tanti nomi, alcuni nomi nuovi, alcuni nomi che conosciamo già da tempo. Siamo anche live su YouTube. Ok. Giuseppe, noi ti vediamo in questo momento in full screen. Almeno io ti vedo in full screen, non so gli altri.
non vedete le mie slide?
No, non vediamo più le slide. Non so gli altri, io ti vedo se...
Ok, mi provo a riscerare.
Non sei il mio
Allora,
tipo, ecco, però...
allora facciamo così. Provo a fare di nuovo share dello schermo.
Scusami, sì, grazie.
Share la tua presentazione.
Riprovo.
Share il desktop, share. Vedete il deck?
Sì, ora sì, ora sì.
Ok.
Perfetto. Ok, direi di partire perché sono 18:40 e non vorrei togliere altro tempo a chi deve parlare oggi. Benvenuti, grazie per esservi collegati. So che ci sono stati un po' di problemi anche oggi di connettività, cercheremo di risolvere e essere più bravi per la prossima volta anche con chi magari cercherà di seguire più avanti i nostri meetup. Siamo ancora virtuali, come probabilmente qualcuno di voi ha seguito il lancio dell'Italian Chapter che abbiamo fatto partire come progetto a dicembre. Qui ci sono tutte le persone che stanno collaborando a questa iniziativa, Eugenio, Michele, Andrea, Giuseppe, Alberto, eccetera. Quindi insomma la comunità sta crescendo ed è sicuramente un piacere avere tutte queste persone a bordo. Grazie a questa attività stiamo riuscendo anche ad avere più collaborazioni, a portare anche temi molto interessanti da presentarvi, e oggi parliamo sicuramente di una cosa molto interessante che è un po' un tema di frontiera, uno di quelli di cui si parla tanto, e ora cercheremo anche di capire il perché, che è quello dell'interoperabilità tra ambienti blockchain. Grazie Giuseppe, fantastico. Quindi agenda di oggi, breve welcome, poi lascerò la parola a Giuseppe Giordano di Accenture e a Peter. Sorry Peter, I don't know how to spell or to pronunciate your surname.
Sono i vari.
Sono i vari, thank you. Lasceremo la parola a Giuseppe e Peter che ci racconteranno un po' di Hyperledger Cactus. Io non ruberò tanto tempo, poi chiaramente c'è la sessione aperta a condividere esperienze da parte di tutti. Oggi il meetup sarà un po' più breve rispetto a quello che facciamo di solito. Cercheremo di farne di più, ma un pochino più brevi, per avere più tempo poi per presentare quello di cui vogliamo parlare. Prima di lasciare la parola a Giuseppe, volevo solo farvi un appunto. Se Giuseppe mi riesce ad andare sulla prossima, perfetto. Seguiteci, abbiamo creato un po' di materiale, abbiamo creato una pagina su LinkedIn, quindi ci potete seguire su LinkedIn. C'è una pagina direttamente wiki sul sito di Hyperledger, quindi potete anche vedere quelli che sono le attività, le idee che stiamo lanciando come Italian Chapter. Vi ho copiato qui le prime 4 sessioni come meetup su cui ci concentreremo, quindi oggi parliamo di Cactus, il 28 avremo Digital Asset, il 13 febbraio avremo Change Stack, poi ci sarà di nuovo come IBM, sicuramente ritorneremo a parlare di fabbrica, quindi abbiamo un'agenda che stiamo costruendo pian piano. Siamo sicuramente interessati, anche se avete delle idee, se avete delle proposte, fatevi avanti, contattateci e vi mettiamo in agenda. Sarà sicuramente nostro piacere, anche sia come condivisione di esperienze che come magari idee o tematiche tecnologiche o di business di cui parlare. Quindi qui aspettiamo solo voi per allungare questa agenda e inserire altro materiale, altre sessioni nel nostro percorso. Con questo lascerei, passiamo magari in inglese, o comunque lascio la parola a Giuseppe che oggi in maniera molto gentile si è fatto carico di raccontarci di Cactus insieme al suo collega Peter.
Ok, giusto per confermare, vedete le mie slide adesso?
Sì, assolutamente.
Perfetto. So, guys, let's switch to English also because Peter, my colleague from the United States, is gonna present in English. So let's do the full presentation in English. It should not be a big problem. So just as a way of introduction, I'm Giuseppe Giordano. I am a senior manager at Accenture, Italian, as you can guess, but I've been working in France for a number of years, 12 exactly. And I'm part of the Accenture Labs, which is the R&D organization. And with that, I've got the responsibility of all the R&D around blockchain and multi-party systems that we run at Accenture. And as part of this, with my team, we were really the initiators of the project that now is called Cactus, but at the time it was the Blockchain Integration Framework, which started to tackle the interoperability, or even better, the integration problem back in 2018. Before we get into the content, Peter, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Peter Shomodivari. Welcome everyone, thanks for having me. I work in a different division within Accenture, but also I'm a software architect, and just to keep it short, I'm assigned 100% to being one of the maintainers of the Hyperledger Cactus project.
Thank you, Peter. So let's get started. Before we get into the technical details of the content, in particular with Peter, who's gonna show a little bit of the framework in action, some sort of disclaimer here. Cactus is now a top-level project within the Hyperledger greenhouse, but it's still in incubation status, which basically means that it's not ready for production, at least until we reach the release 1.0. So most of the things that we'll talk about are still in development. We need help, we need contributors, so feel free to jump in, ask questions, release contribution, approach myself and Peter in particular if you want to contribute. In terms of coding, documentation, use cases, this is an open community and we really value the contribution from anyone, whichever the background is. So a little bit of history around this project. As I said, this started as part of the R&D work that we do at the Accenture Labs back in 2018, when we started looking at the problem of interoperability and integration between different platforms. And of course, we were not the only ones. We are not the only ones. This is a very common project that many companies are trying to tackle. And we also patented a couple of things around this topic, and together with the open source at Hyperledger, we also made available the patents that we made. But very quickly, while working on this kind of topic in particular, but blockchain in general, we really understood the importance of open sourcing and building a community around this specific topic of interoperability. And that's when we started thinking about contributing to Hyperledger. And while having some discussions with some colleagues and peers, we found out that in particular Fujitsu was working on something which was very similar in terms of approach and in terms of structure. And basically, as part of this discussion, together with Fujitsu, back in November 2019, we decided to open source the blockchain integration framework, that was the name at that time, as an Hyperledger Labs project. And for the ones of you who are not familiar with the Labs project is basically a possibility that we have within Hyperledger. It's a sort of safe environment where you can test the idea around a specific project, around a specific contribution that eventually will make it to a top-level project if you are able to prove that there is enough traction, that there is potential to build a community, and there is a group of contributors who are willing to bring the project to the next level. This was in November 2019, and really the very first effort as the Labs project was to refactor the code and really to start consolidating around the same code structure together with Fujitsu, realizing that we were coming from two different code bases, and as a contribution, we really wanted to make something unique upon which then build the future of the project. Then March 2020, for the ones of you who remember, the Hyperledger Global Forum in Phoenix, just before the COVID crisis started around the world. And that's when the very first discussions around graduating the blockchain integration framework to a top-level project started. And really, it was pretty quick to the level that May 2020 was when the blockchain integration framework graduated as a top-level project, and now it's known as Project Cactus. And if you look at the Hyperledger greenhouse, now you will see Hyperledger Cactus within the tools family that is available as the different project contributions within Hyperledger. Now, why we look at this? Why is it important to look at integration between ledgers? Basically, because as all of you know, and I'm sure based on your respective experiences, there are many use cases and many platforms out there, and probably there is no one blockchain solution to rule them all, in the sense that different platforms have different characteristics that fit best with some use cases versus other. And really, this project is to tackle the problem of trying to avoid too much fragmentation around platforms, and in particular business ecosystems, because here the risk is really about creating a lot of ecosystems that eventually use different platforms, and then we are back to the silo problem where these different ecosystems cannot communicate between each other. And really, with this kind of project, we want to give the opportunity to developers and to companies to start realizing that it's possible to have these different ecosystems that eventually are built on a different DLT platform to communicate between themselves. And for the developers, the idea is really to try and avoid reinventing the wheel every time you need to integrate with the different ledger. And from a pure business perspective, we've seen many companies who are not ready to make the jump to the next level after the proof of concept or the pilot, simply because they believe that the technology is not mature enough and they want to wait to see which is the winning platform, without realizing that eventually, even if there are different competing platforms, then eventually they will be able to communicate between them. Also realizing that, by the way, in terms of platform, especially in the private and permission space, we've seen quite a lot of consolidation in the last couple of years. So what is it? What is it, Cactus? As you will see, and Peter will go really into much more detail than I'm doing with this introduction, it's basically a pluggable framework. It's an SDK of SDKs that really gives you the possibility to transact on multiple ledgers without having to introduce yet another competing blockchain. Of course, we could have done this in many different ways. We've seen approaches where everything is some sort of centralized with an interoperability node in between, but we really wanted to do something which was as decentralized as possible without a ledger in between, and giving the possibility to the different ecosystems to reuse as much as possible from the technical capabilities that are available. So that's why we call this an SDK of SDKs. So the framework is an SDK itself. And then this is designed to be extremely modular and pluggable so that you can add new plugins, which are SDKs themselves, that give you the possibility to integrate the different ledgers that eventually are available or will become available. And you will see that there are a number of features, especially around reusing existing roles. So when it happens that, for example, you need to validate a transaction that is moving an asset from one ledger to another, the idea is to build an overlay network of validators that sit in the different ledgers. And those are the ones responsible to validate and approve that a transaction can really move an asset from one ledger to another, move a certain data structure from one ledger to another, or decide to which of the ledgers to route that specific transaction. And really, with the objective of being as inclusive as possible from a pure development perspective, this is designed to be as independent as possible from a language perspective. So you will see that when it comes to the moment of contributing your plugin as a new SDK that we want to integrate, you can pick and choose the language that you like, so that we are not restricting the community of developers that can really contribute. And in terms of ledgers that are currently available with plugins, we've got Fabric, we've got Quorum, Bezu, and Corda. Of course, there is a lot of work to do. Peter will now go to the next level of detail when it comes to the technical capabilities of this framework, but really look at this as an invite to understand what this is, and really an invite to contribute with whatever you like. As I said, documentation, code, use cases, everything is useful here. So feel free to jump in, ask questions, and contribute. With that said, Peter, I'm gonna stop sharing and I leave you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Peter.
Okay, great. So as Giuseppe said, there is a bunch of fragmentation, and I just have a slide to show that it is really bad, because if you have 100 ledgers that you want all of them to be able to talk to each other, then you will actually end up having to have 5,000 integrations, and that number goes quadratically with the number of ledgers. So that's part of the answer to the question of why. And just a really, really simple view of a use case, we want to have happy users who can use Cactus to communicate to different ledgers. I will get into much more detailed scenarios, but I like to start with this just to show that Cactus is its own component that helps you communicate with the ledgers. And regarding the design principles, as Giuseppe already pointed out, the plugin architecture is the most important. It's we really aim to be flexible very much, and we want to hopefully be future-proof in this sense. Then there's secure by default, which honestly is just as important. It's a simple one, but we always see software projects fall into this mistake that in the name of convenience, they end up publishing software that has default admin credentials for user and password, and then a lot of people get burned by that, and it makes the news, and it's not good. So that's why we have that. And then toll-free, meaning that if you install and deploy Cactus in production with default settings, there is no built-in mechanism that will start charging users for any sort of transaction fees on any of the ledgers or otherwise. So that's something that is completely left to the operator to implement if they want to. And then the last big one is low impact deployment, meaning that the existing ledgers are out there and we intend to be able to work with those installations out of the box as much as possible. We don't want to come out with a proposal where we release the software to the world and then tell everyone that, okay, so the first thing you got to do is use a different ledger or install some sort of plugin extension that is necessary for Cactus to work even on a basic level. Of course, there are instances where you will have to deploy contracts for specific things, but the idea is by default, it just works with the ledgers as they are. There's some additional principles. There's actually a bunch of them that we agreed upon with the maintainers way back early last year. So I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a list in the white paper. I'll just say a couple one, namely wide support, meaning that we want to be able to support 99% of the ledgers that are out there, even ones that are exotic. So to make sure that we can do that, we are trying to assume as little as possible about what a ledger is on top of the very baseline, which is that it's basically just a persistent data store that can store a chain of blocks and is able to execute some sort of code written in some sort of programming language, aka the smart contracts. And the other one that I like to highlight quickly is horizontal scalability. It's again very simple to state, very difficult to achieve. If you have an application, you end up falling into pitfalls where you want to have state or some sort of storage, but then the moment you do that, you lose horizontal scalability because now you depend as a bottleneck on that database or cache or whatever it is that you're using. So we're trying our best to remain in a way that if you want to deploy Cactus and there's some really high performance, high throughput scenario, then you can just scale on your favorite cloud provider by adding additional servers without basically have to write additional code to actually make that work. The architecture, again, this is super high level still, but we're getting deeper. The idea is that there's ledger plugins that are responsible for knowing and understanding how to communicate directly to the ledgers. And then there's business logic plugins, which you can also plug straight into Cactus, which can help serve a web application or a smart contract on the blockchain. and these two communicate, and that communication is part of what Cactus is facilitating. And the small part here, the API call between the user and the whole deployment, it's a small thing there on the diagram, but it's actually a big amount of work to be able to have the API clients in different languages available, so that if you are a developer who's writing an application where the backend is Cactus, then you get a lot of developer convenience out of having the client libraries ready for you that you can just install, run some sort of authentication, and then off you go. You can run transactions on different ledgers right from your application, from your favorite programming language. And a few architectural decisions that we made that we hope are okay. The code is written in TypeScript, and it gets bundled in Webpack so that we have the ability to have universal packages where the same code written in TypeScript can run on the backend and on the client. This enables us to go a little faster, be a little more productive, and probably make a little less mistakes because there's less code duplication going on. And then the other big decision that it's a pet peeve of mine, is test automation. Everything or almost everything has to be tested automatically in our CI on every single commit that gets pushed to Git, so that if there's some mistake, we catch that early on and fast. Because it would be impossible for us to scale ourselves to manually be able to test and verify the basically infinite amount of scenarios and use cases, because like I showed in the beginning, the fragmentation has a pretty steep growth curve in the number of things that you have to take care of as the number of ledgers grow. So plugin architecture is definitely what we are betting a lot on. We admit that we don't know what the future will look like. We don't know which ledgers are going to be the biggest ones next year or 5 years from now. So basically, the plugin architecture is there so that we can build something that hopefully will adapt to whatever those ledgers are going to be. It may be ledgers that are already around today, and then it will be easier, but it could be that something new comes in and just sweeps everything other, or all the other ones off the chessboard. And regarding the governance model, Giuseppe already highlighted this, but I want to underline again that if we put a lot of effort into this, so that if you don't have the time or the willingness to actually contribute to Cactus itself, because there's a lot of chores coming with it, we're reducing those, but there's still some. So if you want, you can just open up your editor, write the plugin that implements the interfaces that are prescribed. You can push it to GitHub, push it to NPM, create a Docker image or anything, and start using it as your own. And you can publish it as well for others to use. So the bottom line is that you don't need my or anybody else's thumbs up approval for your plugin to work and for others to be able to use the plugin. And a little showcase for the language agnostic plugin development, which is actually done within Cactus itself as of today as well. The idea is that you can write an open API specification, which is a JSON document declaratively describing data types, and HTTP requests for operations. You feed that into the generator, which actually ends up spitting out ready-made code that can be server-side code, client-side code, and in different languages. So what you can do, and this is actually done within Cactus today just to show that it works. What you can do is that, for example, you can write a plugin server-side in Rust, and you can compile that, you can containerize it or just start a process by itself, deploy it on a server. Then you can start the Cactus API server, which is a Node.js process. You can configure it so that it uses your plugin over HTTP that is actually running in Rust. And to the other Cactus components, such as other plugins, this will actually be transparent. So there will not be any sort of compatibility issues out of it. And sorry, just one more thing about this. This is something you can check out in our code today. There is a Keychain plugin implemented for HashiCorp's Vault that is written in Rust. And there's end-to-end tests verifying that the TypeScript code inside Node.js is actually able to use that to communicate with Vault. So then a common question that we hope will come up a lot is, what about supporting X? X being a ledger or X being some sort of authentication mechanism that maybe we don't, or other sort of identity features. And every time someone asks that, I can already say this little chart is what is going to go through my head. If there's a plugin for it already, then I'll just say use that plugin. If there is no plugin, but it is already an aspect of the framework that is pluggable, which we hope to have most of it like that, then I will just say there's an interface for that plugin. You can implement a plugin of your own that is supporting X, which is what you want to support it, and then use the plugin, and that's it, you win. But if it's not a pluggable aspect, for example, you want to customize how the internal logging of Cactus is working, which is at the moment not pluggable, then I will have to say, first, you need to send a pull request to Cactus. We will have to vet and approve that. And then you, in that pull request, will end up defining the interface for the plugin for logging. And once that's accepted and done, then you can write your logging plugin and then use it. So that's all the edge cases covered, basically, about how do you extend the framework. And the idea is that for the most part, you don't even need to talk to us if you don't want to, so that the community can scale to many, many people. And then back to my Keychain example, because I really want to bring home the point that it is supposed to be very simple. This is the current actual Keychain interface for the plugin that we have. And this is roughly what I ended up implementing in Rust for that example that I was talking about 2 slides ago. And even the code I've written in Rust, 99% of that was actually just auto-generated because we already had the OpenAPI specification for the plugin as well. And this is just demonstrating, again, the same thing with the plugins. Those green little icons with the plugs, those are the plugin instances, which can be loaded in the Cactus API server, but they don't have to be. And that is the point here, that these and the API server can be separate and they can achieve their goals all the same. And the API server will transparently make it work. And what you see here is that somebody wants to interact with one of the ledgers and they have an identity on that ledger. And to use that identity, you will most likely need credentials, some sort of private key. And so the way you can implement a functionality like that, if you don't want the person to have to manage their own private key, which is what you will want a lot of times in enterprise use cases, then you can put that private key on in a secret store and just ask the person to provide a reference to that so that they don't manage the key. They just say, oh, the key that I have in the secret store. And then that way, the Ledger plugin can use the Keychain plugin to retrieve that secret and then perform the operations on behalf of the user. And again, the key takeaway here, you can write this plugin in Rust, you can write this plugin in Java, or the other way around. It doesn't matter. So that's all about plugins. I really like to talk about the plugin architecture, but now I also want to explain about what it means to preserve Ledger features. It means that if two ledgers that you're transacting with and performing maybe an atomic swap, and they both support something additional, such as private transactions, then ideally we don't want you to have to give up on using those features just because you chose to use Cactus. This is, of course, much more difficult than it sounds, especially with private transactions, which is very difficult. It's not a well-formed sort of practice in software engineering yet. But yeah, this is the idea. This is the design vision that we have. And then regarding the transaction protocol, we want to try to avoid unintended side effects, meaning that if you're doing a transaction with multiple people on multiple ledgers, everything should be defined up front so that all the edge cases, not just the happy path, is taken care of in a way that nobody ends up in a situation where they just lost their funds because they didn't really understand all the possibilities. Basically, we just want to avoid surprises like when a public ledger that has proof of work suddenly forks and you lost your funds. So ideally, we want to defend against that by making it explicit for the person who's running the transaction that this may happen. We also want batch transactions where applicable, but this is sort of a little more niche scenario. I just want to make sure it's covered because in my during my career, I worked a lot with databases, and batch transaction execution was always needed for high throughput production scenarios. And then back to performance and scalability. The very simple vision here is that the bottleneck should always be the ledger, not Cactus. This goes back to us trying to ensure that we are horizontally scalable. Because as long as we are, it means that it will always be the ledger that's slower. If you just increase the number of servers that you're running Cactus on and it actually scales, then you will always be able to outpace the ledger's throughput. And we really want to have published benchmarks so that this is actually visible and we can catch regressions and changes as we go along. Also, it should be fully automated. And now I will show you some code. I was going to present an actual demo with a graphical web interface, but that didn't work out because there was a regression and the website is not working right now. But it's pretty simple. I will show the same thing just in code. Yes. So this is a supply chain app example. If you look at the path, you can see that this is one of the packages developed for examples. This is the business logic implemented in Scalability. It basically stores data records. Excuse me. And this is not production ready code. You know, it's literally just an array of some sort of model entity where you can insert and get the list. So the bottom line is that what this example wants to show is that you can deploy contracts like this on multiple different ledgers, such as Quorum and Basin. And then you can very easily, as a developer who may not know much about blockchain, maybe you're just a web developer in an enterprise, you can use Cactus to relatively easily create an application that has a web front end where an end user can actually manage this data. And despite the transactions happening on multiple different ledgers, you can get a consistent view of the data as well. And the way that happens is that you write a plugin, a Cactus plugin. Specifically, this is the business logic plugin that I was highlighting in the architecture diagram earlier. And the two important parameters here in this endpoint object that gets registered, endpoint stands for the HTTP endpoint, is the address and the application binary interface of the contract that I was just showing you. So you pass these in and you pass in the Quorum API client, which is what Cactus gives you. And then inside this endpoint, what will happen is that the Quorum API client will invoke the actual smart contract in response to your HTTP requests that you can send in from the web browser. And what it does, this one, for example, inserts a record where the record itself is really just a piece of JSON document that describes a bamboo harvest, because we are talking about supply chain. And then what this ends up going to is the Ledger Connector plugin, which will have a run transaction functionality. If I can find it. Yes. So there's a transact method which will get invoked, and there's different ways of signing the transaction. If you want, you can use the keychain, meaning that the private key will be retrieved for you and you don't have to deal with it in your code. But if you want, you can provide your own private key in your request, or you can use the built-in GEF keychain of Ethereum. That's sort of an exotic use case that I don't really expect people to use much. And then you can also just send in a transaction that you already signed yourself. But again, if you're doing that, then you probably are not going to use Cactus much anyway, because you're implementing everything from scratch, it seems. But it's nevertheless is an option. So this is how you can get from the browser, from just calling a method on our API client in the browser in your JavaScript application, all the way to the backend and invoke a smart contract. And you can do it on all the supported ledgers as well, not just a single one. And the last thing I want to show is these open API specifications, which is really just the declarative way of showing exactly what I just showed you. And this is important because this is what powers the code generation features that we have. That's what gives us the ability to provide you with API clients for all those different languages in the future. And let me just get back to the slides.
So Peter, why don't you switch to the slides? Can I ask you some question?
Yeah, sure. I just have the one slide and then I will take the questions anyway.
Okay, no, so continue and then I'll wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is our roadmap because a lot of stuff is just not ready yet. We want to have atomic swaps to start. We want the hash time lock contracts, but we also want it so that if you have some other kind of algorithm that either was invented or you just prefer it, then you should be able to do atomic swaps with whatever algorithm you want, and this should be pluggable. And we are actually redoing the Corda connector from the ground up right now, so that's kind of under construction at the moment. But as Giuseppe said, we did have one earlier that was already working as well.
Cool.
And identity, we want to be able to deal with identity solutions that are out there, but it's still sort of, it's an elusive and difficult topic that we're still working on. So that's the one that's most in the work in progress stage at the moment. And my usual call to action, just like Giuseppe said, please try and help us if you can, and definitely at least provide feedback. And now I will be happy to take questions.
Yeah, so first of all, Peter and Giuseppe, thank you very much. This was very, very interesting. And
thank you.
I actually have a lot of questions, but before I start, maybe somebody else wants to start. So I'll leave to anybody else, and then maybe I can ask some of the questions that I have for you.
Carlo, it's Eugenio here. I just want to have a very short question. It seems, as you already mentioned, first of all, also thank you for your presentation and your time today. Actually, this software is still in developing phase for the first release. What's your suggestion for maybe making a sort of timeline for this first release in order to start having some production and possible strategic business development activities around that?
Personally, I definitely want that to happen this year. I don't know exactly when, and I cannot make any commitments either, but my personal goal is to have that this year, if possible before the fall, but that's of course getting a little ambitious. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Okay, thank you.
So any other questions for Peter and Giuseppe? So
something interesting, guys, to hear from you would be, of course, the questions from Carlo, but also if you guys have seen interesting use cases on the business side that could benefit from these kind of functionalities. I think that's always an interesting discussion.
Again, on my side, I see this very flexible solution that can be adapting for larger scale adoption, more institutional, where also can be in some sense complying with antitrust policy that for sure will be applying in the EU zone. So yeah, I see some potential in this. But of course, it's my opinion, because it's creating like a sort of independent bridge between different protocols. Of course, in terms of efficiency and institutional reference cases, they will have a very huge impact in terms of application. And this was also my reference to a possible timeline, because I think as soon as we can have some tests over there, we may, I think, also acknowledge the capability in full of this solution.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eugenio.
So, I have plenty of technical questions, but I leave the technical question just paused for a moment. One question that I had is, so when I happen to talk to customers and they ask for me about some interoperability, the first thing, I just want to share it. The first thing is I need to understand what they are actually asking me when they say interoperability. Sometimes it's just they don't want a kind of lock-in on a choice. So they want to be sure that if they choose, for example, I don't know, Besu today, they can move to Corda or to Fabric tomorrow relatively easy. And so this is one of the things that probably Cactus is some way addressing. Am I right on this?
Yes, we do have an initiative started by someone who wants to develop a migration plugin, which would mean that not just allow you to switch from Besu to Quorum in a way that now you can choose to which one to transact on, but you can also try and move the data that you have on your old Besu ledger onto Quorum.
Yeah, but this is the other question that I had, because when you start thinking about this, you really need to understand not only, so when we talk about interoperability, so if we talk just about frameworks, I agree, this is what we need. If we talk about platforms, or we talk about solutions, or about processes, or about data, you start having a lot of other topics to address, like, I don't know, this data representation in one environment versus the other, or how I implement a process, how I manage, for example, maybe a hash time lock could help in managing some issues in this, but I really want to see, for example, an asset flowing from one blockchain to the other, right? And this way different from being, let's say, abstracting from the framework is about managing different communities to have the same view of an asset, for example. So do you see this is going to help us as well from a Cactus perspective? This is something that could be addressed with technology. Yeah.
But to customers, you also have to inject a dose of reality, some sort of statement about it's a framework, it's not a magic bullet. So it will not disappear all the problems. It's there to help you make it easier to tackle those problems. And I'm really hoping that we can define the plugin architecture in a way that whatever comes up, the community will be able to rally to it. For example, if there's a mass migration from Besu to Quorum, then I would hope that there would be people in the community as well who would write some sort of plugin that helps with that specifically.
Yeah. So let me rephrase. So what Cactus can do is kind of putting what's needed to create an abstraction layer between technologies. Then it is a matter of the business to manage the abstraction layer in terms of business.
Yes, and we try to be not forcing the abstraction layer on you either.
Yes.
So if, well, it's very difficult to phrase it in a very high level terms without actually getting into the code, but we don't want to lock you into our own abstraction layer where you cannot use anything else. Through the plugins, you should always be able to do something different.
Sure. Okay, so from my side, thank you for the answers, Peter. This was very clear. I don't know if anybody else has some question, or if anybody wants to share any experience, for example, in interoperability, or some ideas. We are going to have open discussion now. We are a bit late, but
actually, speaking about interoperability, I because of my activity, I had the chance to see some projects, especially Quantum, that is working on I think on an API connection, and on the other side also I'm sort of involved on what's happening in China with the blockchain-based service network. I don't know if you, Peter, have some information about that, if you can try to make some comparison between these projects, if you have. I think this is a topic that can be addressed, and it helps also understanding how high-level organizations are trying to solve these island communication problem, especially in the finance industry.
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the project, so I don't want to risk trying to compare them.
Okay, I would try to make assuming from my information there. I think the main essence, and probably I'm trying to facilitate conveying the information now. It's they're all creating a sort of middle layer to enable all the networks docking on their side and interact. And this is, I think, from probably the business strategy perspective, also the intent of Cactus project. So try to create something in the middle that is quite flexible and can be constituted in the future like the really ground layer for large scale project interacting together in a global data network.
Yes, based on what you just said, I would say they are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we have it.
And in complete transparency, Eugenio, when we open sourced, back in 2019, when we were looking at open sourcing, of course, we also had some conversations there, and we did a comparison, but I think it's a bit outdated now, especially given the direction that Cactus is taking. And I also know that I think Quant did some pilot with the SIA in Italy around this specific topic of interoperability, which also is a very interesting thing. So definitely it's something we need to consider and keep comparing. But I think that concept of middleware, which is some sort of blockchain that sits in the middle, it's something that we wanted to avoid, especially from a business perspective, for governance reasons. To avoid making it even more complex than it is, especially if you have to interconnect the different ecosystems that maybe are competing. We are adding an additional burden when it comes to managing yet another ledger or yet another middleware, which is standalone.
Yeah.
But again, it's something we need to refresh. We didn't look at that for a while now, so happy to have a look again and compare notes if you like.
Okay, thank you, Giuseppe. I would love to hear from you about that and maybe sharing some ideas about.
Sure.
Okay, guys, so it's 5 past the time that we had to discuss. I don't know if there's any other people wanting to share anything, any curious project or anything interesting on this community. Not today. So we'll just thanks again to Giuseppe and to Peter. This was very interesting, and
Thank you.
interoperability is for sure some of the most interesting topics in the and most curious and probably the most researched topics in the blockchain space. So it's good to have this kind of discussions. And yeah, so for the other ones, again, please join us and help us extending the community. We will have another meetup in 2 weeks. So we wait for you in 2 weeks. So we'll get in on January 28th. And that's all. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you everybody for the time, and we wait for you in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, Peter. Very nice presentation.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.